Hey, my name is Owen Brace. I'm 29 years old and I live in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of Creswell, Oregon, the kind of town that has one hardware store, one diner that closes at 2 in the afternoon, and a post office that feels like it's staffed by the same 3 people it was staffed by when your parents were mailing things. The house belonged to my Uncle Dale before he moved to Phoenix for his joints, and I took it off him for a price that was more kindness than transaction. And I've been here 4 years now, patching the things that need patching and leaving the things that have earned the right to be left alone. I do technical documentation. I know that sounds like I'm about to lose you, and I understand that. But let me tell you what it actually is before you decide. I work for a mid-size equipment manufacturer out of Eugene called Harfield Industrial. They make conveyor systems, load-bearing transfer components, the kind of machinery that moves things from one place to another inside warehouses and plants. My job is to write the manuals, the installation guides, the maintenance schedules, the troubleshooting indexes, the safety warnings that most people skip past and that I write as though someone's life depends on them, because once in a while it does. I work from home 3 days a week and drive to Eugene 2 days. I sit at a desk in the back bedroom and I translate the way complicated things work into language that a careful person can follow without an engineering degree. People ask me how I got into it, and I tell them I've always been better at explaining things than doing them, which is only half true. The other half is that I find something satisfying about taking a system apart with words, laying it out sequence by sequence, and making sure that every step accounts for what happens when the previous step goes wrong. You have to think about failure before it happens. You have to anticipate what a person might misread, what they might skip, what they might assume that isn't true. In some ways, it's the most honest kind of writing there is, because there's no room for interpretation. Either the instructions work, or they don't. My daily routine is quiet in the way that suits the work. I wake up at 6:30, make coffee, read through whatever I'm working on from the day before while the coffee is still hot. I work from 7 until noon without much interruption, no phone calls in the morning, no email until after 12, which is a rule I have kept for 3 years, because the morning is when I think clearly, and once the morning goes, the thinking goes with it. I eat at the kitchen table. I go for a walk. I work until 4 or 5. I make dinner, which is rarely anything worth describing, and I read until I get tired. Twice a week I drive to the gym in Creswell and run on the treadmill for 40 minutes, which I do not enjoy, but have decided is non-negotiable on the grounds that I sit down for a living and my body needs to remember it exists. I'm not a complicated person. I don't have a long list of hobbies or a wide circle. I have 3 close friends from college who I see 2 or 3 times a year and talk to on the phone now and then. I have the people at Harfield who are friendly in the way coworkers are friendly, which is a specific kind of friendly that knows its own boundaries. I have my neighbor Diane, who is 64 and grows tomatoes in her backyard, and occasionally knocks on my door with a bag of them and news about the neighborhood, which I appreciate more than I've ever told her. The phone doesn't fill up my evenings. I noticed that stopping mattering to me somewhere around year 3, which is how you know you've made your peace with something rather than actually resolving it. There was a woman. Of course there was. Her name was Priya, and we met at Harfield 2 years before any of this happened, when she was a project manager, and I was the new documentation specialist, and she was the first person who treated the manuals like they were worth reading rather than a regulatory formality. We were together for 14 months. We ended because she got a director position at a company in San Francisco, and I couldn't relocate and she couldn't stay, and neither of us was wrong, which is almost worse than one of you being wrong, because it means there's nothing to fix. You can't diagnose the failure. It just happened the way weather happens, out of systems you understood individually and couldn't control together. I thought about her less and less as the months went on, and then one day I realized I hadn't thought about her at all for a week, and I wasn't sure if that was healing or just forgetting, and I decided it didn't matter, and I went back to the manual I was writing. The whole blind date thing was Marcus's idea. Marcus Tyrell is one of my 3 college friends. He's a high school track coach in Portland now, married for 2 years to a woman named Sandra, who has been, since the wedding, deeply invested in the idea that I should also be in a relationship, which I understand and don't hold against her. Sandra knew a woman, she said, someone she'd worked with at the dental practice before she went back to school. Warm, she said. Thoughtful. A reader. Quiet in the same way Owen is quiet, she said, which Marcus told me about and which I took as the compliment it was meant to be. Her name was Nora Voss. She worked in pharmaceutical supply chain logistics. She lived in Cottage Grove, which was 20 minutes from Cresswell. The plan was dinner at a restaurant in Eugene on a Friday in March, a Thai place Marcus and Sandra had been to twice and said was good enough to carry a conversation. Nora and I had exchanged 2 short emails, both polite and careful, and not particularly revealing. And I had a photograph from her LinkedIn profile that showed a woman with dark hair and steady eyes who looked like she would be competent at most things and patient with the one she wasn't. I drove to Eugene in rain, which is the standard condition for March in Western Oregon. I found the restaurant and found parking and went in and told the host I had a reservation, and he led me to a table in the back. And I sat down and waited. She arrived 8 minutes late, which was nothing, and I was already watching the door when she came in. She was wearing a dark green jacket, and her hair was down, and she was looking around the restaurant the way you look when you're trying to spot someone you've only seen in a photograph. When she found me, she smiled, a little uncertain, a little relieved, and came over, and I stood up. And she said, "Owen? I'm actually Ren." A pause. Nora's twin. She got sick this afternoon. Food poisoning. She's pretty sure, though she also admits she may have panic-eaten half a jar of peanut butter this morning. So, she stopped. "I'm sorry. She didn't want to just cancel on you." I volunteered. I looked at her for a moment. She had the same dark hair as the LinkedIn photograph, the same steady eyes. But where Nora's photograph had a quality of composed stillness, this woman, Ren, had something else. Something that moved even when she was standing still, like a current underneath. She was holding her bag strap with both hands, and her chin was up. And she was watching me with an expression that was doing 2 things at once. It was apologizing, and it was also completely unapologetic, which is a combination I had never encountered before and did not have an immediate way to process. I almost said I'd just head home. I'd had a long week, and the drive back through the rain was going to take 40 minutes, and there was leftover pasta in my refrigerator, and a chapter I'd been meaning to get back to. I almost said it. Instead, I said, "Okay," I gestured at the seat across from me. "You should sit down. You're blocking the aisle." Something shifted in her face. The apologetic part of her expression stepped back, and the unapologetic part took over, which meant she smiled for real. She sat down. She put her bag on the empty chair beside her and shrugged off her jacket. She looked at the menu like she was reading it, which I doubted. "Ren," I said. "Short for Renly," she said without looking up. "My parents did themed names. Nora is short for Honora. We've been correcting people our whole lives, and I've made my peace with it." "What do you do?" I said. She put down the menu. "I'm a cartographer," she said. I looked at her. "I make maps," she said. "Mostly digital, for land management agencies and environmental survey companies. Sometimes paper, for people who want something physical." She seemed to be watching me process this. People always think it's more romantic than it is. Mostly I sit at a screen and argue with GIS software. I write equipment manuals, I said. People always think that's less interesting than it is, she said. I looked at her again. She was looking back at me with those steady eyes, and there was something in them that was calibrating, the way eyes do when they're actually paying attention and not just waiting for their turn to speak. That's accurate, I said. Nora mentioned you explained your job in your first email, she said. She read it to me out loud. I thought it sounded precise. She read you the email, I said. We read each other things, she said. We're twins. We have different boundaries than most people. The waiter came. We ordered. When the waiter left, she picked up her water glass and held it without drinking. Can I ask something? She said. Sure, I said. Are you annoyed that she sent me instead of just canceling? I thought about it. No, I said. Why not? She said. That would be a reasonable response. Because you drove from wherever you came from in the rain on a Friday night for someone you've never met, I said. That's a strange thing to do for someone you love. I find it hard to be annoyed at that. She looked at me. The calibrating quality in her eyes shifted into something else, something warmer, more careful, like she'd made a preliminary assessment and updated it. Cottage Grove, she said. Same as Nora. We live 12 minutes apart. Did she ask you to come? I said. She panicked and said she didn't want to just cancel, and I said I'd go, and she said that was insane, and I said I'd go anyway, Ren said. She tried to call you to explain herself, and you didn't answer. I was driving, I said. She knows, she said. She felt terrible. Tell her not to, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then, you're easier to talk to than I thought you'd be. You had a theory about me? I said. Nora said you were careful, she said. And quiet, and that your email sounded like someone who thought about every word before he put it down. That's how I write, I said. I know, she said. But it made me think you'd be stiff, uncomfortable with the situation. She tilted her head slightly. You're not. I'm uncomfortable with a lot of things, I said. I'm not uncomfortable with honesty. She smiled again, the real one. Me neither, she said. The food came and we ate and talked about the mapping work. She explained the difference between topographic and planimetric maps in a way that was genuinely interesting, which surprised me, though I thought later that I shouldn't have been surprised. Because she was the kind of person who'd thought about why things were interesting before she described them, and cut out the parts that weren't. She asked me about the manuals with actual questions, not conversational ones, and when I explained the philosophy of writing for someone who might skip a step, she said, "You're writing for human failure, not human competence." And I said yes, that was exactly it. And she said, "That's what cartography is too. You make the map for the person who's going to read it wrong." By the time the plates were cleared, I had stopped noticing the rain outside. She ordered tea, and I ordered a second coffee, and she wrapped both hands around the mug when it came, and looked at me across the table. "How do you feel about the fact that Nora's going to ask you about tonight?" she said. I hadn't thought about that. "Honestly?" I said. "Please," she said. "I don't know what I'd say," I said. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that and respected it more than a pat answer. "Me neither," she said. "And I'm the one who has to tell her." There was a pause. "She's going to ask what you were like," I said. "Yes," she said. "What will you say?" I said. She looked at her tea. She thought about it for longer than people usually think about things they're asked in conversation, which I noticed. "I'll say you were the kind of person who writes instructions for what to do when things go wrong," she said. "And that you seemed like someone who thought about it for himself, too." I held her gaze. My hands had done something with the coffee cup that I wasn't paying attention to. "You should give her my number," I said. "She should call me herself." "I will," Ren said. We split the check, she insisted, and I let her, on the grounds that it was a strange enough situation that normal rules didn't apply. We put on our coats. Outside it was still raining, the kind of Oregon rain that has settled in for the night and isn't apologizing for it. She had parked 2 blocks away. We walked together without discussing it, and when we got to her car, a dark blue sedan with a parking permit from Lane County on the back window, she turned to say goodnight. "Thank you," she said, "for not being stiff." "Thank you for coming," I said, "in the rain, on a Friday." She looked at me for a second. The current beneath the surface quality was there again, something moving under the steadiness. "Good night, Owen," she said. "Good night, Ren," I said. I walked back to my car in the rain and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. I had gone to dinner expecting one person and spent the evening with another, and the whole thing should have been awkward in a way that doesn't recover, and it hadn't been. And I was sitting with that fact, trying to figure out what to do with it. I started the engine and drove home and ate the leftover pasta and went to bed. Nora Voss called me on Sunday. She apologized thoroughly and sincerely, and she had a warm directness on the phone that I could hear clearly, and I told her there was nothing to apologize for, and I meant it. We talked for 20 minutes. She was easy to talk to, thoughtful, genuinely curious about the documentation work, funny in an easy, unguarded way. She asked if I'd had a terrible time, and I said no, and she said, "Ren said you were good." I didn't ask what that meant. She asked if I wanted to try again sometime, an actual proper dinner, when she wasn't recovering from either illness or anxiety peanut butter. I said yes. We went to dinner 3 weeks later, on a Thursday. It was good. She was warm and grounded, and she asked real questions and listened to the answers, and she laughed easily, and she was exactly as advertised, which is not a small thing. Sandra had described her accurately. She was someone who would be good to know. Over coffee, she leaned forward and said, "So this isn't the worst blind date in history?" And I said, "The bar was set weird." And she laughed. She hugged me outside the restaurant and said she'd like to do it again. I said I would too. On the drive home, I passed a sign for Cottage Grove. I drove past it. Then I drove back past the exit. I merged back onto the highway and kept driving, and I told myself I was doing the right thing, the decent thing, the sensible thing. Nora was the plan. Nora was the introduction. Nora was the person Sandra knew and had thought of, and had set this whole thing in motion for. Ren had come to fill in for her sister on a rainy Friday, and we'd had dinner and talked about maps and manuals, and that was the whole of it. I told myself that for about 2 weeks. I went to dinner with Nora twice more. The second dinner was on a Saturday, and she wore a yellow shirt, and she looked happy, and the conversation was good. The third dinner, she told me about her job and a project she was proud of, and her face lit up when she talked about it, and I was genuinely glad for her. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine when she was making a point, and I noticed that I noticed it and was not otherwise moved, and I sat with the precise honesty of that for the rest of the dinner. The thing about technical documentation, about writing instructions for failure, is that you learn to identify a disconnect between what a system says it's doing and what it's actually doing. You learn to read the gap. And I had a gap. I had a clear, measurable gap between what I was telling myself and what I was actually doing, which was counting the conversations I'd had with Ren on my fingers and thinking about the way she'd said you're writing for human failure, not human competence, and the 2-block walk in the rain, and good night, Owen. Good night, Ren. I told Marcus, which was the only person I could tell. We were on the phone on a Wednesday, and I laid it out as plainly as I could, which is the only way I know how to do anything. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sandra is going to have feelings about this." "I know," I said. "You're sure?" He said, "About what I said to you just now?" I said. "Yes, okay," he said. "Then you need to say it to Nora before you do anything else." "I know," I said. "She's a good person," Marcus said. "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to hurt her. I'm trying to not hurt her more by letting this go further." Marcus was quiet again. "Then she's going to tell Ren what you said." "I know," I said. "And you think that's okay?" "I think it's honest," I said. Which is the closest I know how to get to okay. I drove to Cottage Grove on the following Saturday. I had called Nora and asked if I could come by, and she'd said yes, with a kind of even tone that meant she had probably already understood something. She met me on her front porch with a mug in both hands, and I stood at the foot of the steps and said what I needed to say as plainly and carefully as I could, which was that I liked her very much, and I was sorry, and I had done something wrong by not recognizing this sooner, and that I didn't think it was fair to her to continue. She looked at me for a long moment and she said, "It's Ren." Not a question. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she said. She was quiet for a moment. She didn't do anything. "I need you to know that." "I know," I said. She looked down at her mug. "She's going to be difficult about this," she said. "She'll think she did something wrong just by existing. That's what I want to talk to her about," I said. Nora looked at me for a long moment, with the same steady dark eyes I had sat across from at dinner 3 times. And something passed through her expression that I can only describe as a decision made and accepted, which is the bravest kind. "Okay," she said. She went inside and came back out with her phone and called Ren right there on the porch, standing 2 feet from me. I heard it ring twice. Then I heard Ren's voice and Nora said, "He's here. He needs to talk to you." A pause. "No, come over." Another pause. "Ren, come over." She came over in 17 minutes, which told me something about how she'd driven. She pulled up in the dark blue sedan and got out, and she was in a coat I hadn't seen, a canvas field coat, and her hair was back. And when she saw me standing on the porch, she stopped walking. Nora said, "I'm going inside. You two can use the porch." She looked at me on her way past. "Be honest," she said. "You're good at it." Ren came up the porch steps and stood against the railing and crossed her arms, not angrily, just like she was bracing, the way you brace when you think something hard is coming and you don't want to look like it'll knock you down. "Whatever you're about to say," she said, "I want you to know that I haven't done anything. I haven't said anything to her about you since that dinner. I came to fill in for my sister and I went home. That's the whole story." "I know," I said. "That's not why I'm here." She looked at me. "Then why are you here?" "Because I've been going to dinner with Nora for 3 weeks," I said, "and thinking about a 2-block walk in the rain." She was very still. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," I said. "I'm here because I needed to tell Nora the truth, and I needed to tell you the truth, and the truth is that I sat across from you for 2 hours, and I couldn't stop paying attention, and I've been trying to figure out why for 3 weeks, and I figured out why, and I think you deserve to know." She was watching me with those eyes that calibrate. Something had moved in them. Not the warm, careful shift from dinner, but something more guarded and more serious. The way you look at information you're not sure you can afford to believe. "Owen," she said. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I'm not standing here with an expectation. I stopped. I tried again. I write instructions for failure. I figure out what goes wrong, and I account for it in advance. And the one failure I didn't account for was that I would spend 3 weeks pretending I wasn't thinking about you. She uncrossed her arms. Something happened to her posture. The brace came down, just slightly, like the first degree of a door opening. "I thought about you too," she said. Her voice was quiet, flat with the effort of saying something that cost her something. I told myself I didn't. But I thought about the manuals, and the thing I said about mapping for the person who reads it wrong. She paused. I thought about the walk. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Somewhere inside the house there was the sound of a cabinet closing. "She's okay," Wren said. "You should know that. She came home after your third dinner and said she wasn't sure it was going anywhere, and I didn't say anything, and she said, 'I think he's thinking about someone else.' And I asked her what made her say that, and she said, 'Just the way he looked out the window.' My throat had done something. "She's not broken-hearted," Wren said. "She's disappointed. There's a difference. She wanted it to work because Sandra wanted it to work, and because she liked you. But she hadn't fallen." She looked at the floor of the porch for a second. "I'm saying this because I need you to understand that I'm not choosing between your feelings and hers. She's already done that part." "I know," I said. "She told me to be honest." "That's very her," Wren said. She looked at me. I looked at her. "What do you want from me?" she said. Not unkindly. Precisely, the way she'd asked to me at the restaurant, please, and meant it. "I want to take you to dinner," I said. "Without rain, ideally, without it being a replacement for something. Just you and me and a table." She was still looking at me with the calibrating eyes, but the thing moving beneath the steadiness had changed quality. It was warmer now, more careful, like a current that had found a channel. "You drove to Cottage Grove on a Saturday morning to tell my sister the truth before you said anything to me," she said. "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, barely above the sound of the wind in the porch railing, she said, "Choose me. Not her, not the plan, not the right thing to do. Just choose me." I looked at her. "I am," I said. "That's what I'm doing." She crossed the porch and she kissed me, which was unexpected and not unexpected at all, warm and careful and over quickly. And she pulled back and looked at me with those steady eyes at close range and said, "Okay, no rain. An actual table, and you have to tell me how the manuals work, all of it, because I only heard the beginning." I said, "That's going to take a while." She said, "I know. I have time." That was in March, 14 months ago. We are in May now, which means we have been through a full year and then some of Saturdays in Cresswell and Cottage Grove, and drives between the two and dinners where I explain conveyor systems, and she explains GIS software, and neither of us minds the specifics, because the specifics are the whole point. She moved to Cresswell in January, not in with me. She rented the place on Alden Street that used to be the Price family's rental, 3 blocks from the hardware store, with a room she turned into a proper map studio with a large format printer she'd had in storage for 2 years because she never had the space. She comes over most evenings. She has a drawer in my dresser and a section of the cabinet by the coffee maker, which she organized in the same way she organizes her data layers, by what she uses most and what she can find without looking. Nora came to Cresswell for a weekend in September, and we all had dinner together at my house, which Wren had cooked most of, and I had contributed a salad and my best effort at not being nervous, which was partially successful. Nora brought wine and Sandra's regards, and a frame she'd made with a photo of Wren and me that Nora had taken at some point without either of us noticing, which is the thing about people who watch carefully. You forget they're doing it. The photo was us on the porch after dinner. Wren leaning against the railing the way she'd stood the morning I drove to Cottage Grove. Except now her arms weren't braced, and she was looking at me, and I was looking at the road, and we both looked like people who had stopped being careful in the way you're careful when you're waiting for something to go wrong. Nora put the frame on the kitchen counter while I was washing dishes and said, "Without ceremony, you're good together." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me. I'm just reporting." Which was very Nora. Diane from next door came over last week with tomatoes and met Wren for the first time, and afterward she said to me, out of nowhere the way she says most things, "You know, love doesn't always start where you expect it to." I didn't ask what had prompted that. Diane has been watching this neighborhood longer than I've been alive. There is a map on the wall in the hallway now, a topographic print of the terrain between Creswell and Cottage Grove, the 20-minute stretch of road we've driven in both directions more times than I can count. Wren made it. She printed it at scale and framed it herself and hung it last week while I was on a call, and when I came out and saw it she was looking at it with her arms crossed and her head tilted. "What do you think?" she said. "I think," I said, "that it's very precise." She said, "The scale is actually slightly compressed on the east side." I took some liberties. "Where?" I said. She pointed to a section of the print. I looked at it. To my eye, it looked exactly right. "You can barely see it," I said. "I can see it," she said. "But I like it better this way. It puts the 2 points closer together than they actually are." I looked at the map for a moment. Then at her. "That's the most cartographer thing you've ever said," I said. She looked at me with the calibrating eyes that I know by heart now, the ones that assess and update and land, finally, at warmth. "I'm going to take that as a compliment," she said. I said, "It is one. I think sometimes about the man who drove to Eugene in March, rain for a date that turned out to be someone else, and almost drove back empty-handed and said okay instead, and gestured at a seat, and was present enough to notice when something was happening that he hadn't planned on. I think about the gap between the systems that said this wasn't the plan and the actual thing that was occurring, and how I had spent years learning to read that gap in manuals and equipment and troubleshooting trees, and how strange it was that the most important time I ever read it, I was sitting in a Thai restaurant on a Friday night with a cartographer I'd met 40 minutes before. She told me once that mapmaking isn't about recording the world as it is. It's about making the world legible for the person who has to move through it. You choose what to include and what to leave out, and where to compress, and where to expand. Every map is a set of decisions about what matters. I think about that, about the decisions that brought me to a porch in Cottage Grove on a Saturday morning, and to this house in Creswell where someone has organized my kitchen cabinet by frequency of use and printed a slightly compressed map of the distance between us, and to the particular quiet of two people who have both, separately, learned to live with quiet, and have found that it sounds different when there are two of you in it. Maybe the best instructions aren't the ones that account for every failure. Maybe the best ones account for the moment when the thing that seems like a failure turns out to be the one that matters, when the wrong step leads somewhere the right step never would have gone. I spent years writing for the person who reads the manual wrong, and it turned out I needed to be that person once. I needed to read the situation wrong, show up for the wrong date, walk the wrong 2 blocks, drive the right 40 minutes, to end up somewhere that I could not have written instructions for. Because it was not a place I had imagined getting to. It was a place that was already there, on a map I hadn't thought to look at, 20 minutes from where I started. She's on the phone in the map studio right now, talking through a project with a land management contact in Medford. Her voice carrying through the house just enough that I can hear the shape of it without the words. The coffee I made an hour ago is still warm. The window above my desk is the one that looks out on the road, which is empty this time of morning, and the light is doing the thing it does in May in Oregon when the rain has eased and the green is unreasonably precise, and I am sitting here with a manual open on the screen and not looking at it. And the house has the particular quality of a place where someone is present even in the rooms they aren't in. I once believed that a careful life was its own reward, that if you showed up on time and did the work right and thought about failure before it happened, that would be enough. That the quiet was the thing you were protecting and not the thing you were missing. I built good habits around that belief, and I kept them for years, and they served me, and I don't regret a single one of them. But the night I drove to Eugene in the rain and said okay to an empty seat, I started building something I hadn't put in any of my instructions, because I hadn't known it was a possible outcome. I hadn't mapped it. It wasn't on any chart I'd drawn for myself. Ren would say that's the point, that the map isn't the territory, that you make it as accurate as you can and then you let the person walk. I think she's right. I think she's been right about most things, from the moment she sat down across from me and said, "You're writing for human failure, not human competence." I think she walked into a restaurant to do her sister a favor, and she did exactly that. She did me the favor of being completely herself for 2 hours, and I had the good sense, finally, to pay attention. That's the whole of it. A wrong plan, a right walk, a map with the distances slightly compressed, and 2 people who learned to be quiet in separate houses and found out what it sounds like when the quiet is shared.